It's midweek, and welcome to our latest edition of Weather or Not. Well, we made it to Wednesday, Brian, and we had some showers, thunderstorms again yesterday. Severe weather in the northeastern South Dakota. Wasn't as bad across southeastern KELOLAND. We had some thunderstorms move through, but a couple of severe weather reports here and there, we'll say. Some hail just to the west of Sioux Falls, but a lot of the severe weather reports concentrated across the Northeast.
Right, and it started, of course, late in the afternoon and early evening hours, and then kind of progressed a little farther north and east. I would say probably the Pierre area kind of lucked out a little bit. The storms could have backbuilt a little bit farther west, but still we had some scattered activity that direction. And then the Watertown area we've been talking about on air, and I know you've got a whole compilation of things to talk about there because it's been a rough summer in that northeastern area.
It really has. You know, they've been the bullseye of a lot of things as of late. We'll talk about that coming up as we do recap what happened yesterday with our severe weather, and we have more severe weather in our forecast. High heat, high humidity. We'll notice higher dew point temperatures for today. That is something that will last at least for the next couple of days. And if we have time, we'll talk about this coming weekend. Stay with us on this latest edition of Weather. Severe storms again yesterday, and a lot of it we just mentioned before we went to the break across northeastern South Dakota. But we had a couple of isolated hail reports just to the west of Sioux Falls.
We did. You know, those towering clouds came up. I noticed late in the evening. Of course, with your schedule and my schedule, typically we're trying to kind of get ready for the morning show. So, you know, some of our other staffers will take over some of those evening duties on an occasion like this. But I did notice that as those storms were building west of Sioux Falls a little bit, we did end up with some golf ball size hail at Wall Lake. So just, you know, showing that in there. And the heat yesterday kind of stayed out west. We were looking at highs yesterday. We hit 93 in Phillip. We were 92 in Pierre. And then that heat of the day really, I would say, led to some of the convergence that led to those explosive storms on the North Dakota-South Dakota border.
And well, we may see more days with the severe weather reports coming in as we've had a busy several months, I would say. If it wasn't the severe weather reports coming in, we've had heavy downpours, and we'll talk more about that for the Watertown area. But here's an overall view of what happened yesterday evening going into the overnight. And even early this morning, we still had our thunderstorms in southeastern South Dakota. As we get into the afternoon, we'll see if anything redevelops in the southeastern KELOLAND. We saw some information that was suggesting that earlier in the day. And if that doesn't happen, I think there's a better chance that we can see some storms right along the border of South Dakota and Nebraska. We'll talk more about the forecast coming up, Brian, but go ahead and go through some of these storm reports.
Yeah, this is probably the biggest hail that we found, and that was south of Bowdle, 2.8. So that's baseball size
hail.
Boy, that's bad. Yeah, anytime you get something that big. You know, one time when I was 9 years old, that's the last time I was in a house that was experiencing baseball-sized hail. And I still remember that night. It was my grandmother's birthday, and we had that storm. It came up. Well, that's a long story here, but I was 9 years old, and I just remember the clouds the way they looked that evening, and it was just a strip of hail that hit my dad's farm. The way they were connected, my grandpa's farm was to the northwest. My dad rented another farm, maybe about another mile or two north of that. And it hit all of his farms from northwest to southeast. And then the baseball-sized hail was done, and then the neighbor to the east didn't have near the damage that we had.
What time of year was that?
It was July.
Yeah, so my the crops were in, and they were growing, and things were looking great.
No wind, though. Those great big hailstones, I remember them because we were kids, and my cousins were over at the house, and we picked them all up and put them in buckets afterwards, and we saved them for a long time. But they were all jagged. I remember that. So, yeah, anytime if you're, you know, and that's something nobody wants, baseball-sized hail, but you don't forget it. Let's go back to that graphic there. And, yeah, these other reports, there was one tornado. Now, as of the morning hours, no damage confirmed here, but that was just south of Leola. So that was about 7:54. There was a tornado warning on that. Aberdeen had some pretty gusty winds, 70-mile-an-hour winds at about 9:15. And then, so we click over here into Marshall County, flooding rain. We had a viewer report, I know west of Britain, of about 4 1/3 inches of rain. And they had flash flooding in Britain. That was about 9:15 last night. And I also noticed down the road, it wasn't baseball-size hail, but Bristol had some hail, and then Webster, 1.5 inch diameter. So that's pretty big stuff, too. And then this one I got to fit in here, too, Scott, that report over by this was Sandy Shore, Yep, rec area, where they had 99-mile-an-hour winds on a personal WeatherNet station. So the Weather Service in Aberdeen put that out. The wind gust at the Watertown Airport was just shy of 70. So that storm came in during the 10 o'clock hour last night. I know that was really, pretty intense there. It tended to weaken. Now, the radar picture you're seeing in the background was 12:50 in the morning. Okay, so by that point, it was going through Brookings. They were picking up a little hail in Lake Preston. Most of that was close to nickel size. So we didn't have any more warnings after midnight, basically. And then eventually that headed to Sioux Falls, where it rained. And I think you've got the Cocoa Raws reports here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and check a couple of those. And, of course, these are volunteers that do send in their reports. And you could do this, too. We've talked about this before. They just asked that you have the right equipment for this. Here's that one north of Britain. Now, you mentioned a viewer emailed, over 4 inches of rainfall. We have another report here coming in at about 3 1/3. And just to show a couple of these other reports coming in from Aberdeen, close to 1 inch. Let's go ahead and expand our view. We'll bring over Watertown. And officially in Watertown, Brian, they had 205 at the year. I think it was either 205 or 209. We'll check that number coming up. But that set another record. And if I remember correctly, I think that they've had 2 or 3 other record-setting rainfall dates so far this summer.
That's a lot, yeah. And
they've had a lot of rain.
Yep, and obviously the math there, I think there's going to be more to add into it later this week too. And as you mentioned too, around, I know there was more rain, of course, Castlewood, that's another spot that's been hit hard. Brookings has kind of skipped out a couple of times, but they got it last night.
Look at that, a couple of 2.5.
Yeah, I see that. That's over what, Aurora?
Yeah, 2.5 there. We have one there on the, looks like the southern side of Brookings too, at about 2.5. So able to get some good rains into that location. As we continue south here, let's go ahead and check Sioux Falls numbers. On the east side, close to about 1/2 to maybe 2/3 of an inch. Right in downtown, they've had anywhere from 3/4 to about 8/10. And approaching 1 inch there on the west side of town. So some decent reports coming in. Any other ones that stand out? Let's check here in the southwestern Minnesota, in and around Worthington, as we do get a little closer into that area. The numbers coming in at around 2.5 inches. How about that?
Yeah, a lot of rain there too. So we're definitely having the ability to develop these complexes of thunderstorms, which I recall you and I had this conversation last week. We thought we would get into a rhythm of more thunderstorms. So, the good news is the storms kind of, for the most part, I would say they ran out of steam as far as, extreme severe weather during the overnight. But now the question is, where do we go next? We're going to have some discussions about that, of course, because we've got some weather tonight. And then 2 more in the outlook, at least for Thursday night for some parts of South Dakota, and then Friday. That's going to be a big talking point too.
We'll get to that in just a bit, but let's go ahead and keep this rain theme going and check some of these stats for Watertown so far this summer. There's a look at June. I looked at the numbers, and I think we've had 66 days since June 1st. We've had measurable rain in Watertown 33 of those days. So it rains, when we average it out, it rains every other day.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a wet summer.
It is.
You're doing that much rain.
Really is. So you see there, the number for June, close to 6 inches, about 2 inches above average. 2 of those dates do stand out, highlighted in red. I mentioned this before, that they did set a couple of records during the summer prior to what happened yesterday. At least 2 stand out there in June. One in July, that 27th of July, that's when they also had baseball-size hail, maybe even a little bit larger, 71-mile-per-hour winds, and, of course, that Henry tornado into that location as well. Now, the total rainfall for July, 6 2/3 of an inch. That's above average by at least 3.5 inches. And for the first 5 days of August, they're sitting at 2.5, and the whole month of August averages 2.89. And, of course, yesterday they dealt with the severe weather that we just did the recap of. And checking the other stats I do have offhand, they are above average for the summer in Watertown by 7 3/4 of an inch.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
That is a big number. And, of course, all that embedded severe weather with the rain. So it has, definitely been one that folks remember. And unfortunately, I wish we didn't have to talk about this, but we do. The fact of the matter is more severe weather is possible.
And we'll talk more about that coming up. Welcome back to Whether or Not. We have to talk about more severe weather, Brian. We are looking at a couple of outlooks. For today, it's a marginal risk. And today, we've been following a couple of the models earlier this morning, thinking that we can see some thunderstorms develop late afternoon, early evening in southeastern South Dakota. I'm talking about the HRRR model, and you probably know that. Since what I know it had it at the 6Z run, and then I think it slowly tried to pull that out.
It did. It was trying to resolve the overnight thunderstorms, and I think what it was trying to do, and this is where, we're in a day and age where these short-term, what we call the CAMS models, they're very helpful. They can be extremely precise at times, but it's also so complicated that, like in a case like that, it kind of started suggesting, well, we're going to get some storms around Sioux Falls 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It appears that as of the time of this broadcast that scenario is less warranted. But I still think there's some interesting things going on the European model. In fact, when we were showing, let me show you this. This is the latest on Futurecast, and I'm going to go right to this one right here. Okay, so this is going to pick us up here from where we left off during KELOLAND this morning. And obviously through the day here, we've been watching the temperature climbing. But this right in here, do you see that blow up right around Winter, Valentine? And it kind of runs this route of thunderstorms here. I'll be really, really curious, Scott, if this actually happens, because I've seen remarkable consistency that the European model tried to hone in on a little disturbance right on the top of this ridge, which of course is parked across the southwestern part of the country. And I can't even count how many times I've seen this the last 2 or 3 days. It's tried to route some storms through. The debate is, are they going to be severe storms? Are they really going to organize, or is this going to be just some regular thunderstorms overnight? So there is a marginal risk. You got to take it into consideration. I'd highly recommend checking back in on the forecast on air here as we round out the afternoon, see where that lands here.
So here's that marginal risk for today, and a lot of this may end up happening overnight if those thunderstorms do develop along the South Dakota and Nebraska border. But I don't know if you also saw that, Brian, but I think with that latest HRRR model, it's trying to develop something out here as well in the western South Dakota during the evening hours. So either way, there's a marginal risk as of right now. Hail and wind will be the main threat. There's your hail risk, and here's a look at your wind risk with any storms that do develop. Is there enough spin in the atmosphere for today? Well, none really showing up, so that tornado risk is not showing up as issued by the Storm Prediction Center. Now, for this map, Brian, I went ahead and said after 8 o'clock for tomorrow, for that area that's in that slight risk in north central South Dakota. We'll have thunderstorms that will erupt probably in the western North Dakota. They'll move east, eventually down to the southeast. And then once we get into the evening hours, I think that north central South Dakota will probably get in on some of the strong to maybe severe weather for tomorrow. And then we have this to talk about as well, Brian. In fact, let me skip over my Futurecast that I had on the next slide and bring in this. This is a look at the upper level winds and the precipitation. We showed this map last week. As we expand the view, you notice how the trough starts to dig across the western United States. And you have to keep in mind, too, that we can get these jet streaks that run in the upper atmosphere right here. Now, what that does is it helps supply lift for thunderstorm development. So as we change our view with those strong winds right above us, we'll probably get this air to lift even more. So that will eventually lead to our thunderstorms as we do get into Friday. Now, where do they develop is the big question. Right now, we think a lot of them will probably start in North Dakota because of the cap that will be in place in eastern South Dakota, meaning, of course, you've heard this before, it's too warm to storm. So maybe on the very edge of that cap, we can see some development maybe later into the day. If that happens, it'll probably happen, I would say, after 6 o'clock, late in the day. And it could happen across northeastern South Dakota to include maybe Aberdeen, Watertown. You need to, after the year we've had in Watertown, I mean, why not? It seems like the odds are with us that they can get something.
Right. And as you mentioned, all of that, obviously, we know where the probabilities are converging. Now it's a matter of kind of waiting to see how, well, to a lesser extent, tonight's weather. But then I'll be really curious to see what happens Thursday evening, because that'll probably put down some sort of an outflow boundary if we assume that we're going to get some storms up in north central South Dakota. I see one of our other models that we're looking at here is trying to descend some of those storms out of the northeast, and probably they weaken as they move south. I was looking, in fact, I'm glad you showed this here because I can kind of zoom ahead here on Futurecast right in here. So let me back this up here a little bit. This is Thursday evening. Do you notice all this going on up here toward Mobridge? Even more so on the North Dakota side of the border. See, now that's showing you probably what's reality there. That's what it would look like on radar. I'm not sold that it's that far north, but it sure could be. It could be Bismarck's problem. And then, does that, see, we run out of time here. The model ends. That high-resolution model ends. So that's why you're seeing, one piece here and one piece down here. There's two different models. They're showing you two different possibilities, but the way that they arrive at those is much different. This is a global model. The European model doesn't have the resolution like some of these other models that we show on TV that look cleaner, or that's more of a realistic
radar picture.
Correct. Yeah,
like short-term modeling.
This is what it may actually look like, or it gives us, like, for some of us that are just thinking, okay, what would that visually look like? You can actually see that a little more with definition, but. Whatever happens, let's assume that those storms, make it as far south as at least Aberdeen or Watertown. Maybe they touch, Brookings and Highway 14 before they fizzle. Then there's likely to be an outflow boundary that'll retreat to the north. And look at the weather on Friday. Now, our high, we're going, 90, I think, in Sioux Falls. And we've been parked on that number for a little while. It's not extremely hot. We've got just low 90s there at Huron and Mitchell. But the heat index is going to be at least 100, excuse me, here. And also the wind is out of the southeast, and there's a very sharp boundary. In fact, I can actually draw that right in here.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yep. And that's why SPC launched that enhanced risk, because really that northeast tip is where all of that converges there. And then, of course, the modeling is trying to blow up the storms on the North Dakota side of the border, right up there toward Fargo, and any mode of severe weather. That could be tornadoes, could be hail, wind. And see that? There they are. They backbuild all the way to O'Neill, Nebraska. So I have a sneaky suspicion Friday night could be busy in the storm center.
That's right on that boundary, and it should happen late too. It won't happen early afternoon. Probably after 5 or 6 o'clock on Friday, we'll see these thunderstorms at least try to develop on the South Dakota side of things. Now, you mentioned the heat index. Well, we'll have a lot of humidity in the air as our dew point temperatures, even today, will climb to the low to middle 70s. And then as we get into tomorrow, we'll stay in the middle 70s, very thick humidity. Here comes Friday. Friday, the same thing. You look at Huron approaching 80 on the model. 73 for that dew point Aberdeen, 77 Watertown. So what does the heat index do? Well, you mentioned, Brian, that probably getting into the 100s. We'll stop it here Thursday afternoon, that heat index in central, south central, even southeastern South Dakota in the lower 100s. We'll also show you Friday, as we'll have that heat index, again, upper 90s, lower 100s will be found across a good portion of the area. So we'll have a lot of heat, we'll have a lot of humidity in the air. It's just a matter of where these storms develop. And we think that they will develop first in North Dakota, and then we'll see them maybe back build into South Dakota, again, late in the day, a lot of it probably during the evening hours.
Yeah, so the best advice is continue to watch the updates. Obviously, I know some of you are probably scratching your head thinking, well, is this going to go, could it go to a moderate risk? If it's already an enhanced, that's, obviously that's already pretty high. The bottom line is we'll know more once we get through Thursday's thunderstorms. That'll really help us place these boundaries a little bit better. But I will say with the upper air support, like you showed with that upper level wind, anytime you see decent wind structure in the atmosphere, and then in August, you're already likely going to have more humidity around, and what we call more of the other instability talking points are already built in. See, early in the spring, when we start talking about severe weather, like in April or May, we rely very heavily on the upper air dynamics, the things like jet stream winds, and there's some instability aloft that can build in. And then usually it's just kind of watching, well, maybe that dew point will sneak up to maybe 60, or we'll get a high temperature in the low 70s. And
a lot of the moisture gets pulled in from the Gulf, too.
Oh, it has to come all the way from the Gulf. Yeah, and that's how we start the season. But then when we get to this time of year, then we're almost entirely reliant on just, it's hot, it's humid, and you get some sort of a front that interacts with that. And so that's how that changes through the seasons. And that's why a lot of times, kind of in the middle in June, that's why that time of year is sometimes the worst, because it's both. You got both going on. But in August, it comes back sometimes. And we've had a few of these. In fact, I would even argue you go back to 2019 when the Sioux Falls tornadoes happened in September. This little, whatever it is, late summer has been more active. And the way August is starting, I guess we're just going to have to go through the next couple of days, 3 days for sure.
I think I have those stats written down somewhere in here about going back to, you mentioned August. I just have to find them.
Yep.
Well, that was my homework I did over the weekend. I guess I need to do more homework and research on that, too.
August, I remember back in 2006, we had a surge of tornadoes in that year, because I remember being out near Miller, and we were out actually looking at those, and that was a pretty intense event. But then, like August of 2021, more recently, that's when my house was hit by a big old supercell, and I was on the knob. Yeah, right on the knob where the 90-mile-an-hour winds hit near Canton. So I don't, it comes to August, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember that. And I'm sure many of you have stories as well. So August, statistically speaking, tends to be quieter, but not always.
And we'll watch our weather as we always do, and stay weather aware over these next couple of days. That's it for us. Thank you for watching, Weather or Not.